So welcome back to Trials and Tribulations. Today, as with our normal process, Larry and I decided that we were going to figure out our topic about 2 minutes before we got on the mic here. And Larry thought, okay, let's talk a little bit about content, which is what we're doing here anyway. We're trying to create content so that people will listen to us. Maybe it will make lawyers interested in buying the products that we sell, and also give them a little bit of information about us and about what interests us. But that brings us to the idea that what is the production of content, and how does that affect the practice of law, the choice of a lawyer,
and the business of law?
And how does a lawyer who isn't a natural content creator driving business these days? Because I know that when I started practicing, and also the same with you, the idea of even putting a billboard up or putting out content on the internet to try to promote yourself, that was reserved for advertising lawyers.
The internet barely existed.
Yeah, and advertising lawyers were people that were bringing in large amounts of business. They were more volume practices, and they weren't as much the guys who were taking on 10 or 15 really good cases a year and large dollar figure cases. Those guys, they got their cases purely through referral.
Yeah, not to mention that it was viewed as sort of tacky, and it wasn't respectable in a lot of circles.
But now it's the norm. And so you look around, and I know
not
that
necessary.
That's what I was just going to say, is that if you look around now at lawyers who are trying to encourage people to choose them as their attorney for a personal injury case, for a medical malpractice case, or a product liability case, people look now to the internet for their referrals. They don't necessarily say, hey, friend, who did you use as your lawyer for this kind of case? They go on Google, they search, they watch podcasts, they are looking at Instagram, they are looking at Facebook. And so that is the way in which lawyers are driving business today. So it leads to the two different questions for me. First of all, what is the lawyer who isn't a masterful content creator but is a masterful lawyer? What do they do to continue to drive business for themselves? And secondly, how does the general public discern what is the good lawyer versus what is purely a good producer of content that isn't going to give them that same level of representation in the courtroom?
Yeah, I think it's to ask the questions different ways. You look at it from a client's perspective. Okay, I need a lawyer, now what? How do I find that? And I think that that's something that lawyers have been trying to crack for a long time, and it's a moving target. When someone needs legal services, how do they go about finding the right lawyer for them? And the lawyer, on the other hand, has to understand that process and try to foresee that process to put him or herself in the position to be on the receiving end of that call.
And think about it from, just sitting here and doing this, right? We love doing this podcast or YouTube channel or whatever you call it, but it takes time, right? You got to prepare for it. We have to sit here and record it for 30 minutes, 45 minutes. There's an editing process. Somebody has to edit it. It doesn't just show up and it's there on YouTube. So for a lawyer who is, handling their cases, dealing with their clients, having to go to court, do depositions, they now have to carve out additional time to create content for the internet that will drive business to them. And it's not as if they can just put up a billboard anymore. They have to speak, and they have to talk about things that are interesting, and then they have to find an audience for that. That's the way in which businesses develop these days.
It's always been, we've had a lot of discussions about this. It's always been extraordinarily challenging for a lawyer to develop business because, on the one hand, you have to be a tactician. You have to be a technician. You've got to be doing the lawyering, which is very intensive. It requires absolute focus. But on the other hand, you need to be a business development person. Not to mention someone who's running their own firm. Then you have to be an administrator and a business person as well. But let's just focus on those two things. The business generation, which includes marketing, which includes sales, which can include advertising. And those things have evolved over time. And then you have the technical aspect. Let's set aside the technical aspect for the moment, and let's talk about when we first started practicing, what were some of the techniques that you would use, and what are some of the methods that worked for you to actually drive business into the firm?
So when I first started out on my own, well, let me back it up. When I was first working for a firm, I would develop business because I was in my late 20s, early 30s. And I was really one of the only people in my age group that was doing personal injury, medical malpractice. Most of my friends were doing defense work. They were working at big firms because that's what they did out of law school. And they realized, geez, if I send Justin a case, I can get 25% of the fee and I don't have to do anything. And so that was exciting for people because they would send me the work and I would do all of the work and then I'd pay them a referral fee.
So you had you had a first mover advantage.
Right.
In your demographic, you were the first to get out.
Yeah, it was a network. But as I started to get a little bit older, many of my friends who were my referral sources, they started to become plaintiff lawyers themselves. So
the first mover advantage disappears.
Correct. So now I had to develop.
I experienced a similar thing.
Right. It's a good way to put it. It is a first mover advantage, and it did disappear.
Yeah.
And I had to start developing business on my own through other referral sources, which typically were former clients, people that I had represented, people that I had gotten good results for. But I never used the internet. I never used podcasts. I never used Instagram to drive business. Today, I believe that the primary way in which lawyers are able to drive business is through trying to reach out to the masses in any way they can by creating content. I think content creators and lawyers who are able to reach a larger audience through good content on the internet, on Instagram, on YouTube, those are the people that are going to be able to drive home more business in a reliable way. But it becomes very complicated because A, you got to talk about stuff that people are interested in. You have to get enough people watching, and then that has to convert into an actual case. So it's a long tail process, and it takes a lot of work.
You've got to put the effort in, you've got to put the time in, and that's not always easy, especially for a lawyer who's absolutely focused on preparing for a deposition, preparing for a hearing, whatever it is. You know that when lawyers work most of the time, it's a door closed sort of situation because you're drafting a brief or you're going through a 1,000-page transcript to find the one sentence that you think is going to be beneficial. To do that and then shift gears into a marketing mentality, no matter what time period now or 15 years ago or 35 years ago, I think that's always been challenging. I remember when we first started practicing together, you would say, "Oh man, how can you go out to those events after after hours and you like that so much more than I do and at least at that time, I think that's a more traditional and more conventional way at that time to try to generate a profile for yourself by being more active in certain organizations, being more active in the community. I guess it's just casting a wider net, knowing more people, just hoping that when your particular service was needed, you'd be top of mind.
Right. You have to be out there.
You have to be out there, and you have to be top of mind, meaning that you can't go out there once and then expect to stay top of mind. And I think that philosophy translates into more modern media, into more modern methodologies. And I know you and I, traveling across the country, speaking with thousands of lawyers, over the past decade almost, through our business, I think I can't even remember how many times we've spoken with lawyers who have said to us, I hated advertising. I thought it was, tacky. I never thought I'd be in a position, but now I understand that if I don't, I won't survive.
Right, they'll fall behind, and so they have no choice.
It's survival now, not even how much success you can achieve. It's just about survival at this point. So I think there's a generation of lawyers out there who understand that innately, but I think that there's some who are in between and some who are, from a different time who have had to adapt. And it took some time for people to understand that it wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity.
Well, there's also, from a client standpoint, I know if I were to look for a professional, whether it was an accountant, a lawyer, a doctor, I would want to ask people that I knew and I trusted that had experience with those people before to give me a recommendation. So that's just me.
And I don't think that'll ever change. Also,
but I think it has changed.
But that's one peg.
Correct.
Right, amongst a constellation.
But now, for people who are looking for a professional, are looking for a lawyer, especially one that's going to represent them in a plaintiff's case, they are now bombarded with all types of what I'll call personalities. They are lawyers, but they're also personalities on the internet.
Absolutely, you're right.
And they're really good at making content. They're good at putting emojis up on Instagram pages and showing bags of money and things like that. And that is what's driving people to their lawyers in many ways. And you have to ask yourself as a potential client, is this person going to actually provide me with the professional service in the courtroom that I need? Or are they just really good at putting content together for their Instagram page or their YouTube page? And I think there are plenty of people out there who are really good content creators who are going to be substandard in the practice, and vice versa. People who are very bad content creators are just not meant for that, will provide a superior service, but may not get noticed anymore because they just don't understand how to play that game. So that constant change and evolution of the practice and the way that you market, it's something that is I think very difficult for especially lawyers who are a little older to try to adapt to.
Well, what you said is interesting in many respects, but what I just picked up on, and I think it's true, is that the plaintiff's bar far and away has been the most innovative and ahead of the curve when it comes to marketing and advertising and sales. And I go back to the time when we went to a major firm's nerve center, so to speak, in a warehouse in Brooklyn, and this is now 10 years ago, and they were so far ahead of the curve, we were blown away. We couldn't believe it that they had hundreds of people in call centers. They had heat maps up on the wall, and that was a glimpse into the future.
It was. There's another reason, though, that the plaintiff's bar is what you would say more innovative, is that their audience is more captive in that particular area. Mm-hmm. If you're talking about a corporate law firm, like for us here at Idea Financial or LevelEsq, if we need to have a high-level warehouse lending facility analyzed, we're not going to look for that professional on the internet, because that's an extremely specialized, expensive, hourly area of practice. So we're going to likely, and I think most businesses are going to look for either just a large law firm in New York City or Los Angeles or San Francisco, or they're going to go to some network that's going to help them find that. The flip side of that is the person who was just involved in a terrible auto accident or was the victim of a serious malpractice case. They may not have the resources to find that high-level lawyer.
Yeah, or their network doesn't overlap with networks that, consisting of people who frequently use legal services.
So what do they do?
So it's distinct.
They go to the internet and they try to find somebody on the internet who has put something within those pages that's going to speak to their problem. Mm-hmm. And what do they come across? They're going to come across Google AdWords. They're going to come across YouTube pages. They're going to come across podcasts. And so for that consumer, I'll call them, for that individual, trying to filter through all of those messages to determine who is going to be the one that actually has the skills to be able to provide you with that representation, that's a really challenging, difficult thing to discern. And likewise for the lawyer, to be able to explain to that person or that captive audience why they are the ones that should be chosen is also very difficult. So all the noise out there has made I think the acquisition of clients and cases on the plaintiff side a very complicated area.
There's no question. I think that as the plaintiff's bar continues to innovate, it's also pushed other types of lawyers to do the same sort of thing and to emulate those methodologies. Because even let's say a very specialized transactional lawyer, even that lawyer is going to be forced to engage in some sort of interaction through digital means. And I'm thinking back to some of our experiences now as business owners, having to select different lawyers. We have different lawyers for different things across the country. And I'm going through some of the processes we've gone through. And we've asked around, but sometimes we've interviewed certain lawyers, we haven't been satisfied. And we've found, for example, very specific transactional lawyers through their own media content. And it's not always necessarily Google AdWords and going after casting a super wide net, but I think for a lot of attorneys, it's an opportunity to present yourself as an expert in a certain field. And I'm going back to my beginning days, and that was always a thing that was drilled into my head by some of my mentors, that you have to establish yourself as an expert in something. Get that credibility, build your profile, and that's one way people who are seeking will find you that way, and people who have been referred to you will validate your expertise and validate your skill set through those different things. So I think that that's an important element of it, is presenting yourself to the public as an expert in something.
Well, it's well said, because I guess when you're looking at content, and we know lawyers who do very sophisticated sort of podcasts, and we know lawyers who I think are trying to be a little bit more cutesy and do fun things, I guess, whether it's on Instagram or Snapchat or TikTok, right?
Yeah.
So they whatever the methodology that they're choosing, that's how they're trying to find their audience. But to your point, if your goal is to appear to be intelligent and an expert in your area, what better way to get a free look than to just try to put together a YouTube channel and get it done? But it's not easy. I mean, like right now we're sitting here and we're talking to each other. I'm looking at 3 people behind the camera that are helping get this done, editing it, filming it. And so you have to have a whole team assembled in order to provide this type of a service. Whereas when I first started out, it was okay, I know a group of lawyers or I know a group of people and those people are going to send me business. That doesn't cost me anything but my relationship and a little bit of time, right? And good results. Whereas now trying to get that acquisition is expensive, so you have to weigh the expense versus the return, and it changes the business model.
Well, I think it's more expensive. It's also more of a craft. And when I think back to some of the older methodologies, all right, write an article that goes in the Florida Bar Journal. Who reads that anymore?
Right.
Nobody. Nobody. Go speak somewhere to at a conference. Maybe that's still effective, but I think going now into creating content, it involves some craft. It involves new skills. It involves a different mindset, and I think that's really the jump that a lawyer will have to make in order to keep up.
But does it negate the need to be a part of those networking organizations or go to those events? Because you can bypass that and go straight to the client by creating your own personality or your own content. Therefore, you don't necessarily, and I'm not saying it's true or false, I'm just wondering, do you need those organizations as much, or can you be sort of on your own and just speaking to a camera or speaking to your phone and being able to get the attention that's necessary to be successful just by simply doing that?
Yeah, I think the argument can be made both ways. I think that certainly you can bypass, you have to look at start at square one. Where do people congregate now? Yeah. And people congregate in not necessarily in physical spaces. I think
congregate right here.
Yeah,
they congregate
COVID
on their
sped that up
phones.
even more. So it's always, I think rule number one in marketing and advertising is how do you find your audience? So yes, this sort of can get you directly to your audience while you're sitting in a chair in a room. On the other hand, it can amplify what I'll call some of those more conventional methods. So I mean, how many things do you see in your LinkedIn feed? Somebody at a conference, somebody at a meeting, somebody being invited to speak to a group. They do that, but then you can amplify that by creating content using that and blasting it everywhere.
Well, that's actually a really good point, because I know when we put together this, I don't know if, I guess it's called a podcast or a YouTube channel. I don't know, whatever it's called. We put together this video of us talking. I'll sometimes go and I'll find a clip of the video that I think is good, and I'll put it on a TikTok page, or I'll put it on an Instagram page, or I'll put it on LinkedIn, because I want to try to get people from those areas to come to this area.
Sometimes you'll make me one too and be like, hey man, post this on LinkedIn and don't be lazy.
Right. But what you're doing is you're trying to do this, like, for lack of better term, like this omnichannel approach, right? So sure, we have our video on YouTube, but now we're taking our time to take that, we're splicing a piece of it, and we're putting it in different places so that people will see it, and they'll say, oh, okay, maybe I'm interested in that. I'm going to go and watch the entire thing on YouTube. So it's not just about sitting here and making the video, but then it's about putting that video in so many different areas so that people you'll find the audience to listen to it. And as a lawyer, the idea is, okay, if I can get 100 people to watch this, maybe 5 of those people have had a legal issue that is concerning to them, and hopefully one of those people will reach out to me to contact me to be their lawyer, and then it becomes worthwhile, right? Yes. And that's sort of the math behind it.
So each one of those channels has their nuances. So again, this goes back to the craft. It has to be entertaining. You have to evolve the content or create the content in such a way where it shines in each of those individual channels, which leads me to another thought that I've seen a lot of. in other words, you can't do half measures. If you're going to do it, you've got to do it properly. So I've seen there are a lot of friends of mine who say, all right, who begrudgingly go on to different social media platforms and start posting things, and they suck. It's just like a picture of them saying, hey, here I am. Or
proud to be invited to whatever. They just
and that's not effective. If anything, that can be counterproductive. Say, all right, this guy's posting things, or once a month there's something on there. It's dull, it's boring. That can have the opposite effect, perhaps.
For sure.
So another message is you have to embrace the craft, put the time into it, put the effort into it, and create the best content possible, or else you might as well not even bother.
But you also have to have a little bit of, I think, you have to have a little bit of some guts, and you have to be willing to accept criticism. I don't know about you, but I have the kind of friends that just like to talk trash, and if they see me doing this video, they'll find like a little piece of it. They'll send a group text message, and they'll have a little bit of fun making fun of me for it. But you have to accept that if you put yourself out there, there are going to be people that are going to either joke with you about it, hate on it, talk trash, because you've had the guts to actually put yourself out into the public domain.
You know how many screenshots I've gotten texted to me with my eyes closed? Like, my friends will find like the 1 minute where I look strange on camera, and they'll freeze it and send it to group text.
Of course. I mean, just this morning I was watching some lawyer's Instagram page, and I found a part that was funny, and I sent it out to some of my friends. So that's the downside of the content is that once you put it out there, it's open for everybody. So now it's for public consumption.
Yes, but when people start sending you screenshots, you're doing something right, though.
I guess
because
watching.
What? It's like, all right, it got into their hands, didn't it?
That's true. And so, but I guess the big question here, if you're talking to lawyers, is how does somebody who isn't primed for the camera, somebody who isn't used to sitting there and talking about stuff without a responding audience, how does that person become effective at this new need to create this content? You can't it's not something you can just do. You have to have some talent or some skill at it. And if you're not doing it, it's likely that you're going to be behind your peers. So how do you resolve that? How do you fix that as an attorney? And how do you create that personality so that it's consistent? Again, I don't mean to ramble. I'll let you answer that question. But the one thing that one of our team members told us that when they were doing research about how to best put yourself out there, whether it's on Instagram or TikTok or YouTube, is you have to have a consistent, reliable personality. You have to be yourself. You can't try to create somebody that you're not. And that can be sometimes difficult because when you put yourself in front of a camera, sometimes people feel that they have to create an alternative personality, or they're not comfortable with themselves, so they want to try to do something different. So how do you advise somebody who has no media training, no understanding of how to do this, to suddenly become a content creator to drive business?
It's a strange phenomenon that we've all become more public-facing. And that's just happened. It's not just in a commercial aspect, but in a personal aspect. Everybody has some degree of a public profile now. And I guess that's a whole other topic we could discuss in another podcast. But I think that to keep up, if you're going to commercialize yourself and you're in some sort of business where you're marketing yourself, because again, we're talking about, as an attorney, as a lawyer, you're marketing yourself, right? If you're selling lamps or if you're selling microphones, then the microphone can be the star of the content. But as a lawyer, you're marketing yourself. So I think it's inevitable, whether you're kind of comfortable, or terrified of being in front of a camera, that's a challenge that you have to overcome. If you don't like the sound of your own voice, you better get used to it. I don't think there's a choice. That's my conclusion.
No, it's funny you talk about the sound of your own voice. I think anybody who's not accustomed to recording themselves, listening to themselves, they sound different to themselves when they hear their recorded voice. I've gotten to the point now where my recorded voice sounds exactly the same to me as when I hear myself speaking. It all started when I used to dictate to our assistant.
Oh yeah, that was always the weirdest when we'd hear the dictation back.
I'd be like doing a dictation, I'd listen it back, and my voice would sound weird, but as I did it more and more, it started to sound the same. And now when I listen back to the YouTube channel, it sounds exactly to me the way that it does when I'm speaking. So you sort of get used to it. But it's awkward at first to hear yourself speak or to watch yourself on video when you're not used to it. And they don't train you for this stuff in law school. They don't train this stuff when you're a young associate. So if you're going to go out there and develop your own business, you've got to train yourself to do it. And it's not always an easy thing to do. Then I would love for anybody who's actually watching this right now, who is a lawyer, who has their own podcast or their own channel, I'd like to start interacting with those folks and listen to their podcasts and get some of their advice and some of their thoughts and
I think
bring them on here.
I think this fall we're going to start being guests on some more podcasts, and we'll rearrange our studio so we can accommodate guests.
Yeah.
That'd be a lot of fun.
I think it would, because hearing other people's perspective and hearing how they react to this environment, I think would be best, I think, for us from an evolutionary standpoint, but also just in discussing areas of importance to lawyers and law firms, having other people and other personalities on this show would be good.
But you know what? I'll answer your question more directly. Now I'm thinking about it. I don't know many people, if any, who are totally comfortable right away in front of a camera, or who are totally comfortable speaking into a microphone, listening back, going through an editing process. It's a bit unnatural. I'm sure there are a few people who are extraordinarily gifted, and they're on, they're news presenters. But practice does help. Repetition does help. And I think the more we do this, the more comfortable we've become.
Right.
And I'm thinking back to some of the first spots that we did for Level. Remember, we went to a studio down by the airport and got the makeup and the whole thing. Went to an actual studio. I was terrified.
Yeah.
And I watched some of that now, and I was terrible.
Well, I used to do news spots for like CNN or headline news when I was younger.
And it showed, because you were good.
I was okay, but I remember when I was being criticized, I would be told I was looking away from the camera or I needed to adjust my voice. So whatever. I mean, I was learning as I went, but as we've gotten used to it, I think it's gotten better. But even sitting here talking to you right now, the folks who are sitting in the room recording it, I mean, they're judging everything that we say. They're wondering if this is good or if it's bad, and who knows how they feel about the content until it's all said and done. But we just got to flow with it and try and do our best and try and create something that people will find to be interesting. And
that is the nature of good content.
And that's trials and tribulations, right? You go through it and you do your very best. So that will conclude this episode of Trials and Tribulations. Hope you enjoyed us talking a little bit about the challenges that lawyers have, both in creating their content and also for clients in trying to determine who is a good lawyer and who's just a personality on the camera. Hope you'll join us for the next episode. Hopefully you'll subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you have any thoughts or any comments, we'd love to hear from anybody who's watching about what we can do to create better content or topics that you may find interesting. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. This episode was sponsored by LevelEsq.